Real Magic, Dean Radin, PhD. Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, and a Guide to the Secret Power of the Universe. Brian Josephson, PhD, a Nobel laureate in physics, says it's a convincing case for the reality and significance of magic. Chapter 1, Beginning. This book is about magic. Not the fictional magic of Harry Potter, the fiend magic of Harry Houdini, or the fraudulent magic of con artists. Not the blue lightning bolts springing from the fingertips, aerial combat on broomsticks, sleight of hand tricks, or any other elaborations of artistic license and special effects. Occultists sometimes use the Old English spelling magic to distinguish fictional and stage magic from the real deal. We'll use the more common term, magic, to avoid unnecessary associations with the occult. Real magic falls into three categories: mental influence of the physical world, perception of events distant in space or time, and interactions with non-physical entities. The first type I'll call force of will. It's associated with spell casting and other techniques meant to intentionally influence events or actions. The second is divination. It's associated with practices such as reading tarot cards, and mirror gazing. The third is theurgy, from the Greek meaning God work. It involves methods for evoking and communicating with spirits. Unlike books that discuss beliefs about magic from psychological or historical perspectives, or that list recipes for spell casting, the goal here is to explore real magic from an evidence-based scientific perspective. Why a scientific approach? You wouldn't know it by reading most college textbooks, but there's a vast scientific literature that informs our understanding of real magic. When I was in college, none of my coursework mentioned anything about that literature. But now, after 4 decades of experimentally studying magic, motivated by scientific curiosity and without a religious background that might have biased me to be over-sympathetic about metaphysical concepts, I've come to 2 conclusions. First, there is no doubt that science is the most accurate lens on reality that humanity has developed so far. What we collectively discovered about the nature of nature over the last 3 or 4 centuries, from the quantum to the cosmological, is an awe-inspiring testament to our creativity and imagination. Technologies based on that knowledge provide proof that our discoveries are valid. So, when considering real magic, it would be foolish to just throw away what we've already learned. But second, reality viewed through the lens of science is an exceedingly thin slice of the whole shebang. Science is tightly focused on the objective, measurable, physical world. That focus excludes the one and only thing you can ever know for sure, your consciousness, that inner spark of sentience that you call me. While science as a practice has primarily concentrated on the objective world, scientific methods are extremely powerful. So if we wish, we can redirect our lens to look inward and explore what consciousness is capable of. When we do that, we are startled to find whole new realms of knowledge. One of the consequences of taking this inner perspective is that the idea of magic transforms from an impossible fantasy to an aspect of nature that we can begin to study. From this stance, terms such as paranormal and supernatural are seen as quaint and antediluvian, similar to how modern medicine no longer needs the concept of bad humors when discussing the origins of disease. We'll explore this new realm of knowledge through 2 major themes. First, based on a substantial body of experimental evidence, we can state with a high degree of confidence that real magic exists. Second, there are rising trends in science suggesting that what was once called magic is poised to evolve into a new scientific discipline, just as medieval astrology and alchemy evolved into today's astronomy and chemistry. The new discipline will be the study of the psychophysical nature of reality, that mysterious interstitial space shimmering between mind and matter. Understanding how this enigmatic space works in a way that's consistent with the rest of science requires a new worldview, the lens through which we understand reality. Another theme we'll discuss is that magic didn't miraculously disappear with the rise of the scientific worldview. Magic is still intensely present. Prayer is a form of intentional magic, a mental act intended to affect the world in some way. Wearing a sacred symbol is a form of sympathetic magic, a symbol correspondence to said to transcend time and space. Many religious rituals are forms of ancient ceremonial magic. The abundance of popular books on the power of affirmations and positive thinking are all based on age-old magical principles. From a conventional scientific perspective, these widespread practices are considered examples of infantile magical thinking, fairy tales. Some scientists even use the word magic as a synonym for nonsense, because it implies that scientifically appalling idea that some things just happen for no discernible or plausible cause. But magic doesn't mean no cause. It just means that we haven't yet developed scientifically acceptable theories to explain these effects. As we'll see, there are already important hints that may lead to such theories. So it's best to think of real magic not as something impossibly mysterious, but as a forerunner of the future of science. Magic is everywhere. The possibility that magic is real can be terribly unsettling to those who prefer that it not exist. Consider A. J. Ayer, Sir Alfred Jules Ayer, 1910 through 1989, a prominent British philosopher who specialized in logical positivism. This is a critical philosophical position that utterly rejects any sort of metaphysical, religious, or magical concepts. As might be expected, Ayer was a hardcore atheist. At 77, he died. Fortunately, he was resuscitated, and to everyone's surprise, he reported a near-death experience, NDE. He described it as consisting of repeated attempts to cross a river and a red light exceedingly bright, also very painful, responsible for the government of the universe. Ayer restrained his atheism, but declared that the experience had slightly weakened his conviction that death will be the end of me. That Ayer reported this experience is more astounding than it may seem. Lifelong logical positivists are tough. They don't slightly weaken their intellectual positions on anything. The link between magic and Ayer's NDE is theurgy, the third category of magic. NDEs, or near-death experiences, suggest that there may be forms of disembodied awareness, or spirits. For many who have experienced an NDE, it's a virtual certainty that such spirits exist. But so far, there is no strictly objective way to tell if that's the only viable interpretation. We'll revisit this issue in more detail later. Another example of magic intruding into the mundane world involves William Friedkin, the director of the movie The Exorcist. Before he made his famous film, Friedkin hadn't witnessed an exorcism. Afterward, he decided to do so. He spent time with Father Gabriel Amorth, a Vatican exorcist. His experience with Father Amorth did not overcome his prior agnosticism. But after showing a video of a terrifying exorcism to 3 prominent neuroscientists and 3 psychiatrists, and not getting the blith dismissal that he expected from those experts, it scared the Hades out of him. A third example is provided by historian Michael Shermer, a prominent skeptic of all things paranormal. In Shermer's 2016 column in Scientific American, he asked, is it possible to measure supernatural or paranormal phenomena? His answer was an unambiguous no. Where the known meets the unknown, we are tempted to inject paranormal and supernatural forces to explain unsolved mysteries. We must resist the temptation because such efforts can never succeed, not even in principle. Not even in principle is reminiscent of a quip attributed to Mark Twain. It ain't that you don't know, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Shermer justified his confidence by citing Caltech physicist Sean Carroll, because Carroll concluded that the laws of physics rule out the possibility of true psychic powers. Why? Because, Shermer continued, the particles and forces of nature don't allow us to bend spoons, levitate, or read minds. Furthermore, according to Carroll, we know that there aren't new particles or forces out there yet to be discovered that would support them. Not simply because we haven't found them yet, but because we definitely would have found them if they had the right characteristics to give us the requisite powers. Sidestepping what history teaches us about going public with such conceits, Shermer nevertheless concluded with certainty that searching for paranormal or supernatural forces can never succeed. With that, he slammed the door shut. So far, this is standard skeptical fare. But the peculiar aspect of this story is that 2 years prior to slamming the door, Shermer encouraged the exact opposite. On October 2014, in his October 2014 column in Scientific American, he opened with the following surprising admission. Often I am asked if I have ever encountered something that I could not explain. What my interlocutors have in mind are not bewildering enigmas such as consciousness or U.S. foreign policy, but anomalous and mystifying events that suggest the existence of paranormal or supernatural. My answer is yes, now I have. He went on to describe an event in June 2014 when he was planning to marry his fiancée, Jennifer Graff. Her grandfather was the closest she had to a father figure, but tragically he died when she was 16 years old. One of the few heirlooms she kept from her grandfather was a 1978 Philips transistor radio. Shermer tried to get it to work. He put in new batteries, looked for loose connections, and tried smacking it on a hard surface. It still wouldn't work. So he gave up and placed it in the back of a desk drawer in their bedroom. 3 months later, Shermer and Graff were married at their home in California. She was feeling sad that her grandfather wasn't there to give her away. After the wedding ceremony, something strange happened. They heard music. They traced it back to the desk drawer in the bedroom. It was her grandfather's radio, playing a love song. They were stunned into silence. Finally, Graff whispered, "My grandfather is here with us. I'm not alone." The radio continued to play that evening, fell silent the next day, and never worked again. Shermer's reaction? I have to admit, it rocked me back on my heels and shook my skepticism to its core. As a result, he wrote, still reeling with awe, if we were to take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive or the riddle unsolved, we would not shut the doors of perception when they may be opened to us to marvel in the mysterious. What happened between his modest proposal calling for openness in the face of the mysterious and 2 years later when he slammed the door shut? I can't speculate about Shermer's change of heart, but one thing we do know is that when one encounters a belief-shattering event, it's not uncommon to promptly forget about it, or even to deny it ever happened. Psychologists use the term repression to describe such cases. As magician Peter Carroll once put it, when people are presented with real magical events, they somehow manage to not to notice. If they are forced to notice something uncontrovertibly magical, they may become terrified, nauseated, and ill. Shermer's experience suggests that real magic is always present, patiently waiting below the calm surface of the everyday world. Every so often, its tentacles brush our leg, causing shivers to shoot up our spine. It's that electrifying quality that makes magical fiction so captivating. Magical stage illusions endlessly entertaining, and magical fraud so easy to perpetuate. The word magic comes from the Greek word magos, referring to a member of a learned and priestly class, which in turn derives from the Old Persian word magush, meaning to be able or to have power. In the early 19th century, the word magic also took on the connotation of entertainment, delight, or attraction. Magic also implies exotic, alien, or the other. But this subtext is an important reason why magic is persistently alluring. But the allure often manifests in the sense of watching a train wreck, simultaneously attractive and repulsive. Our magic, which is a core facet of our religious practice, is, of course, fascinating and perfectly acceptable, but their practices are dangerous, outrageous, and evil. Incidentally, the word fascinate comes from the Latin fascinatus, meaning to bewitch or enchant. The words bewitched and enchant have roughly the same meaning as magic, as do the words charm and glamour. Magic is everywhere. Power. As in ages past, many people interested in real magic today are motivated by a desire to wield power. Power to get wealth, fame, love, or sex. All of these applications are possible, and there are plenty of books, videos, websites, and smartphone apps that provide recipes for magical rituals and spells. Some folks, especially those who subscribe to an orthodox religious faith, may recoil from the idea of spell casting. Many traditional religions teach that magic and witchcraft are fundamentally demonic and evil. But the way magic is used is completely up to the magician. The power itself, like any fundamental force of the universe, is morally neutral. Atomic fission and fusion are just aspects of the way the physical world works. Questions of morality arise when we use such natural phenomena to create weapons. Magical power intended to manipulate or exploit others is called black magic. It's intensely seductive because, as the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, hell is other people. That is, as social creatures, we must depend on others who may or may not be interested in our desires, and that can easily lead to personal conflicts. Use of magic to resolve these conflicts egregiously violates the golden rule, so it's immoral. By the way, prayers that intend to harm others are also clear instances of black magic. Far right-wing Christians in the United States are constantly railing against the demonic evils of witchcraft. But at the same time, they pray intensely to influence others. As an example, one such individual announced during the 2016 US presidential debates that he was praying that confusion would cloud Hillary Clinton's mind and that fear would come upon her. Then tit for tat ceremonial magicians who were displeased with the outcome of the election circulated a spell to bind Donald Trump and all those who abet him. This type of spell is part of an age-old tradition called Deifictiones Defiction, Defixionist magic. Defixiones magic. It's intended to bind or constrain the object of the spell. Some would argue that a binding spell is not black magic because it doesn't intend to harm an individual. Rather, it aims to prevent harm or threats caused by that person to come to others. This reasoning illustrates the slippery slope that justifies the use of magic in a gray area, somewhere between black and white. When it comes to the consequences of practicing black magic, think of Darth Vader from Star Wars, Smeagol from The Lord of the Rings, or The Legend of Faust. Those stories do not end well. Within the magical worldview, everything is deeply interconnected. So if you intend to harm others, you are likely to end up harming yourself. This is not just because of a guilty conscience, but more like Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Let's just say it would be exceedingly prudent to avoid black magic. Later, we'll look at a few magical practices you can try yourself to whet your appetite. But this book is not intended to be an instruction manual. Here, we're interested in more basic questions like, is it possible to study magic using scientific principles and methods? What does that evidence tell us about the reality of magic? And are there any hints within today's science that tell us how magic works? Where we're headed. In Chapter 2, I'll describe my surprise after it dawned on me that I had been studying magic for about 4 decades without realizing it. Then, we'll survey a potpourri of magical topics, from popular culture to the scholarly study of magic. Why magic is both terrific and terrifying, the continuous horrors of witch hunts, and why we can't help but engage in magical thinking. Chapter 3. We'll follow that with an overview of the history of the esoteric traditions, for that's where we'll find clues about how magic works. Chapter 4. We'll then look at some elementary magical practices, Chapter 5, and from there we'll examine some of the scientific evidence for magic, Chapter 6. That's a chapter I already read, put up online. We'll learn that the results of most scientific tests of magical principles are statistically highly significant, but generally small in magnitude. So we'll follow up that chapter with case studies of 3 real-world Merlin-class magicians. We'll find that the effects typically observed in the laboratory can scale up to jaw-dropping proportions in rare people with high talent. Chapter 7. That will bring us to a discussion about how magic works, Chapter 8. This involves topics such as the metaphysical foundations of science, the knowledge of hierarchies that science uses to carve up reality into separate disciplines, trends in science, and why all of this leads to a new worldview that's consistent with both science and magic. Then we'll wrap up with levitating psychic robots, among other things. Chapter 9. This is Eric Michael Lloyd. I have a master's in psychology, neuropsychology concentration. Thank you for your time.